They say silence is golden. But in that moment, the silence in that church wasn't golden, honey. It was heavy. It was thick, suffocating like a wool blanket on a humid Atlanta summer day. The kind of quiet that presses down on your chest, filled with the unspoken grief and the nosy, buzzing curiosity of 200 people all dressed in their Sunday best on a Saturday morning. The air was thick with the scent of white lilies and frankincense, a smell I used to love, the smell of peace. But I knew then that I'd forever associate it with the day I finally buried a lie. The lilies specifically were my choice. 1,000 of them, pure white Casablanca lilies, flown in from Holland and obscenely expensive. Lilies symbolized death, rebirth, and majesty. I thought it was fitting. The death of my fraudulent marriage, the rebirth of my life, and the majesty of my revenge. The pastor was just finishing his final flowery words over Raymond's casket. A beautiful mahogany monstrosity, a Promethean model from the Batesville Casket Company, polished to a high gloss that cost more than my first condo in Sandy Springs. I paid for it, of course. Just like I paid for the 6-bedroom house in Buckhead he slept in, the Bentley Continental GT he drove, and the very Amenegildo Zegna suit he was wearing as he lay there, looking more peaceful in death than he ever did in life. I paid for all of it. Every last stitch of that Italian silk, every last gallon of premium gas he burned through, every last property tax bill on a house he never contributed a dime to. I was the sole proprietor of the Raymond Wallace experience, and I was finally closing the books on that failed enterprise. Pastor Johnson was saying something poetic about ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and the pallbearers, all dressed in crisp white gloves, were reaching for the lid to close it for the last time, to close the final chapter on the man I thought I knew, the man I'd spent 15 years building a life for. I felt a single hot tear trace a path down my cheek, but don't get it twisted, child. This wasn't a tear of sadness for the man in the box. No, that man, the one I thought I loved, had died for me weeks ago, right in my home office under the harsh blue glow of a computer screen. This single tear was one of pure, unadulterated relief. It was almost over. The performance was almost complete. And then, bam! The grand oak doors of the Ebenezer Baptist Church flew open with a force that rattled the stained glass windows depicting Martin Luther King and the disciples. Every single head in that packed sanctuary snapped back in unison, a collective gasp sucking all the sanctified air out of the room. It sounded like a giant holy vacuum cleaner. My own mother, sitting beside me in the front pew, clutched the triple strand of Mickey Moto pearls I bought her for her 70th birthday so hard I thought they'd turn to dust right there on her chest. And there she stood, framed in the doorway, like a demon summoned from the deepest, tackiest pits of hell, was a girl. Couldn't have been a day over 25. All youthful ignorance and misplaced confidence. She was poured into a fire engine, red spandex-adjacent dress so tight you could practically see her lunch digesting. Her hair was a brassy blonde weave that cascaded down to her waist, the track showing near her scalp where the Atlanta humidity was getting the best of the glue. Her nails were long, curved talons, painted to match the dress, each one adorned with a tiny, sparkling rhinestone that caught the light like cheap disco balls. In a sea of respectful black, navy blue, and somber gray, she was a beautiful, vulgar, glorious train wreck. She took one look at the expensive casket at the front of the church, her face contorting into a mask of what she probably thought was grief. But to me, it just looked like a pure, unadulterated greed. Her eyes weren't on the man. They were on the mahogany, calculating its worth. She was sizing up her inheritance. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings, raw and piercing like a car alarm you can't find the keys to shut off. "Y'all can't close that. Don't you dare put the lid down. Stop!" "That's my husband. Girl, listen. The devil works hard, but a broken, desperate side chick who thinks she just hit the lottery? Honey, She works overtime, holidays, and weekends. And in that moment, I just stood there next to the pulpit in my custom made black St. John suit and my single strand of perfectly matched pearls, and I almost smiled. The board was set, the pieces were in place, the trap was laid, and the rat, smelling the cheese, had just scurried right on in. Let me take you all the way back. Let me pour you a glass of tea and tell you how we got here, because the audacity of this moment was 15 years in the making. For 15 years, I was Mrs. Brenda Wallace, the respected, powerful wife of the charismatic entrepreneur, Raymond Wallace. But before all that, I was just Brenda Thompson, Brenda from Collier Heights. Brenda, whose mama, Clara, worked 2 jobs as a nurse's aide at Grady Hospital to keep the lights on, and whose daddy was a long-gone ghost who existed only in a single faded photograph. I remember the smell of antiseptic that clung to my mama's uniform when she'd come home. The deep exhaustion etched around her eyes. I remember watching her soak her aching feet in a basin of hot Epsom salt water, her face a mask of weary resolve. It was in those quiet moments, watching her sacrifice her body and spirit for a life of just barely getting by, that I swore to myself I would build a different life. A life where my feet didn't ache and my spirit didn't tire. I was Brenda with the straight A's, Brenda who worked 40 hours a week at a call center and a grocery store while getting her finance degree from Georgia State. I remember the nights spent in the university library, fueled by vending machine coffee and sheer will, my head buried in textbooks about corporate finance and market analysis, while other girls were out at the club. I ate ramen noodles and saltine crackers in my tiny apartment so I could afford the power suits for my interviews and Taylor knockoffs from Rich's basement. I gave up sleep, friends, and fun for a decade, all in pursuit of a single goal: security. The kind of untouchable, ironclad security my mother never had. By the time I hit 40, I wasn't just doing well for myself. I was the chief financial officer of one of the biggest logistics companies in Atlanta. I had the corner office on the 45th floor with a panoramic view of the city's skyline. I had stock options that made my bank account look like an international phone number. I had the respect of men who, 10 years prior, wouldn't have given me the time of day. I had built an empire for myself from scratch, brick by painful brick, and I was damn proud of it, but I was also lonely. My life was a fortress of financial security, but fortresses are lonely, cold places. My social life consisted of board meetings and corporate dinners. My relationships were with spreadsheets and quarterly reports. I met Raymond at a charity gala for the United Negro College Fund at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. I was there as a corporate sponsor, seated at a prominent table near the stage. He was there as, to this day, I'm still not sure. He was just there, floating through the room like he owned it, a glass of champagne in his hand, a perfectly tailored tuxedo on his back, and he was smooth. Lord, was he smooth. I was trapped in a conversation with some dry-as-toast VP of sales about quarterly projections when Raymond materialized at my elbow, a warm, solid presence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low, warm hum that vibrated right through me. "I'm sorry to interrupt this riveting discussion of supply chain logistics, but I simply have to know who you are. I've been watching you from across the room, and you have the most incredible presence. You look like a queen holding court." I, who could stare down a boardroom of hostile executives without so much as blinking, actually blushed. He told me he was a venture capitalist, an entrepreneur who specialized in emerging markets. He spoke of cobalt mine investments in Ghana, luxury resort developments in the Caribbean, and international contacts with such effortless, breezy confidence you couldn't help but believe him. He was selling a dream, and I, a woman who dealt in hard numbers and risk mitigation all day, was a prime customer. My life was all balance sheets and P&L statements. He was all blue sky potential and thrilling risks. He was everything my life wasn't. He pursued me relentlessly. 3 dozen long-stemmed red roses sent to my office the next day with a simple card for the Queen. Surprise weekend trips he'd planned. And I'd end up paying for it with my Amex Black card, thinking I was just being a modern woman treating her man. Baby, my funds are tied up in escrow on this Nigerian deal, but I have to take you to Napa. You handle this one and the next 10 are on me, he'd say with a devastatingly charming wink. The next 10 never came, of course. He made me feel seen not as a CFO, not as a boss, but as a woman. My job was high stress, all numbers and bottom lines and brutal negotiations. Raymond was my escape. He was the poetry to my prose, the vacation to my work week. He told me I was brilliant, but that I needed to live more, to enjoy the fruits of my labor. And he was more than happy to help me enjoy them. So I married him. We had the big storybook wedding at the Four Seasons. The one my mama whispered was a little much, baby. Looking back, she was right. It was a production, and I was the producer, director, and sole financial backer. I bought us a beautiful 6-bedroom colonial in the heart of Buckhead with a pool and a 3-car garage. I filled that garage with a brand new Mercedes S-Class for me, my graduation gift to myself, and a gleaming black Bentley Continental for him. I remember the day we went to the dealership. He walked around the Bentley, running his hand over its curves like it was a woman. "A king needs his chariot, baby," he'd said, kissing me so sweetly right there on the showroom floor that I didn't even question signing the check for the down payment and the subsequent monthly notes. It felt good to provide. After a lifetime of scraping by, it felt powerful to be able to bestow such luxury. I was the breadwinner, and I was fine with that. I loved him, and I believed in his vision. I thought we were a team. I was the financial engine, and he was the visionary. When his ventures needed a little cash injection to get off the ground, I provided $100,000 here for a shipping container deal out of Nigeria, $75,000 there for securing permits for a luxury eco resort in St. Lucia. It was a drop in the bucket for me at the time, and I thought I was investing in our future, our shared future. I was funding the dream he had sold me that first night at the gala. But over the last couple of years, the dream started to feel off. The signal started getting fuzzy. It was little things at first. He'd be on his phone constantly, smiling at texts, his thumb flying across the screen. He'd angle the phone away from me, a subtle, almost unconscious movement. When I'd ask who it was, he'd flash that 1,000-watt smile and say, "Just business, baby, just closing a big one." You'll see. He started staying out later and later. Networking, he'd call it. I'd be at home, the dinner I'd had our housekeeper, Maria, prepare, sitting on the warmer, only to get a text at 9:30 p.m. "Hey, baby, got stuck in a last-minute meeting with those investors from Dubai. Don't wait up." The loneliness in that big, beautiful house started to feel as cavernous as the 20-foot living room ceiling. I would sit in our perfectly decorated living room, surrounded by expensive abstract art and Italian furniture he'd picked out and I'd paid for, and feel a cold emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Once, I found a receipt from a jewelry store in his pants pocket while doing laundry, a receipt from Mayer's for a Cartier Love bracelet. My heart did a little flutter, maybe a surprise for me, but it wasn't my birthday or our anniversary. When I asked him about it, he didn't miss a beat. He threw his head back and laughed, a big booming sound that used to make me feel safe. "Oh, that," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the kitchen island. "That was a gift for a client's wife. Oh, you got to grease the wheels in my business, baby. It's how deals get done. The man's wife loves Cartier, so I made sure she got a little something. It's an investment in our future." It sounded plausible. It sounded like the world he had described to me. So I pushed the doubt down, deep down where I wouldn't have to look at it. Then there was the perfume. He came home one night well after midnight, smelling of success, expensive scotch, and cigars. But underneath it all was another scent. It was a cheap, sickly, sweet perfume, the kind of scent that screams cotton candy and desperation like something from Bath and Body Works. It clung to the lapel of his Tom Ford suit like a stain. "Raymond, what is that smell?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even as I helped him off with his jacket. He leaned in and kissed me, his own scent overwhelming the other. "Brenda, baby, you know how these hostesses at the steakhouses spray that stuff everywhere. It's obnoxious. You're being paranoid. You know you're my queen, the only woman for me." That night, as he slept, snoring softly beside me in our California king bed, I picked up the jacket from the valet chair where he tossed it. Tucked into the inside pocket was a book of matches from a tacky nightclub called Medusa that I'd never heard of, and clinging to the dark wool of his collar was a single, long, bleached blonde hair. I pulled it off, held it up to the moonlight filtering through the plantation shutters. It wasn't mine. I stood there for a long time, the hair between my fingers, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. But in the morning, I threw it away. I chose to believe him. Maybe I just wanted to. My entire life was a well-oiled machine. Every asset allocated, every risk assessed and mitigated. My marriage was the one place I didn't want to run the numbers. I didn't want to see the red flags that my own CFO brain was screaming at me. Admitting my perfect husband was a lie felt like admitting my own personal failure. And Brenda Wallace, does not fail. The house of cards built on his lies and my money came crashing down on a Tuesday. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I was in the middle of a board meeting presenting our quarterly earnings report. I was in my element, pointing to charts on a massive screen showing a 15% growth in revenue, feeling powerful and in control. My phone, set on the polished mahogany table, started vibrating. A number I didn't recognize. I silenced it. It vibrated again and again and again. The sheer frantic persistence of it sent a prickle of unease up my spine. The CEO shot me an annoyed look. "Excuse me for one moment, gentlemen," I said, my voice betraying none of my inner turmoil. I stepped out into the hallway, the city of Atlanta sprawling beneath me through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I answered, my voice clipped. "This is Brenda Wallace." "Ma'am," a frantic voice said on the other end. "My name is Daniel. I'm a paramedic. Are you the wife of a Mr. Raymond Wallace?" My blood ran cold. The world tilted on its axis. The bustling city below blurred into a meaningless smear of light and color. "Yes," I managed to say, my throat suddenly tight. "What's happened?" "Ma'am, there was an incident at the LA Fitness in Decatur. Your husband had a cardiac event." "We've been working on him, but I need you to get to Emory University Hospital as soon as you can." Decatur? The gym he belonged to, the one I paid the exorbitant membership for, was the exclusive Onyx Club in Buckhead. What in God's name was he doing at a common LA Fitness all the way across town in Decatur? The question hung in the air, a tiny, sharp harbinger of the ugly truth to come. The first wave was shock, pure, unthinking, paralyzing shock. I don't remember the rest of the board meeting. I don't remember the drive to the hospital, just the surreal feeling of my hands gripping the leather steering wheel of my S-Class, my knuckles white. I just remember the sterile smell, the constant dispassionate beeping of machines, and a doctor with tired eyes and a kind face telling me they had done everything they could. Raymond had suffered a massive heart attack on a treadmill. He was gone. I identified his body. The charming smile I fell in love with was now just a slack, empty line on a pale face, and I cried. I grieved for the life we were supposed to have, for the future that was stolen in an instant. I grieved for the man I thought he was. That grief lasted for exactly 48 hours. Then the CFO in me woke up. The woman who built an empire from nothing kicked the grieving widow out of the driver's seat. I had to get our affairs in order. The estate, the insurance, the accounts. On Thursday morning, I sat down in my home office, the very one where I'd signed the checks for his businesses, and I started to dig. I started to run the numbers on my own life. The first blow, the life insurance, a $5 million policy. He'd always handled the paperwork. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, baby," he'd always say with that easy grin. "I got us covered. If anything ever happens to me, my queen will be taken care of." I pulled up the policy documents on the insurance company's website, and there it was, in big, bold, digital red letters. Policy lapsed by non-missed. The premium payments had stopped 6 months ago. The money he was supposed to be using for the premiums, money I gave him every single month, was gone. My heart started beating a little faster. "Okay, Brenda, stay calm. Assess the damage. Don't get emotional, just assess." I started pulling up the statements for the joint credit cards, the ones he always took care of. My eyes widened in disbelief. It was a bloodbath of my money. Charge after charge. Chanel, Gucci, Louis Vuitton. Thousands upon thousands of dollars spent at boutiques in Phipps Plaza. But none of it was in my closet. There were trips to Miami, Las Vegas, Jamaica. Trips I was never on. There were charges for 5-star hotel suites at the Fontainebleau, romantic dinners for 2 at Nobu, bottles of crystal champagne delivered via room service. It was a roadmap of his betrayal laid out in black and white, an itemized receipt of my own stupidity. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I hired a private investigator, the best in Atlanta, a guy named Marcus Thorne, who found things people didn't want found. And while he started digging into the life of my dead husband, I went into Raymond's closet to the secret lockbox he kept on the top shelf, hidden behind his winter coats. He told me it was where he kept sensitive deal memos. It took me 2 hours with a hammer and a screwdriver, my knuckles raw and my anger mounting with every failed attempt, but I finally pried it open. Inside weren't business documents or stock certificates. It was a second phone. A burner phone. My hands were trembling as I powered it on. There was no password. The audacity, the sheer arrogant audacity of it, took my breath away. The screen lit up with the screensaver, a picture of him. He was on a beach somewhere tropical, his arm wrapped tightly around a young blonde girl in a tiny neon pink bikini. The same girl I would later see in a tight red dress. Her name, I soon learned from the text, was Candy. I opened the messages, years of them, a whole secret life, right there in my hand. Her. "Baby, when you gonna leave that old lady and be with me for good?" "She's so old." Him. "Soon, princess, I told you she controls the money right now, but I'm moving it, setting us up. Soon, it'll all be ours." Her. "You promised me the house, Ray, and the Bentley. I'm tired of my little apartment in Decatur." Him. "You'll have it all, baby girl. The wife of a millionaire gets whatever she wants. Just be patient." "Millionaire?" The word mocked me from the screen. He wasn't a millionaire. I was the millionaire. He was a parasite, a charismatic, handsome 6'2" parasite who had attached himself to me, draining me of my money, my love, and my dignity, all while feeding this little girl a fantasy world built on my bank account. I scrolled through the photos. There she was, posing in front of the Bentley, my Bentley. There she was, wearing the Cartier love bracelet from the receipt I'd found. There was even a picture of a positive pregnancy test she'd sent him 3 months ago, followed by a string of texts about needing money for a procedure. He had sent her $5,000 that very day from our joint account. I felt the grief in my chest curdle and transform. It turned into something else, something cold and hard and sharp. It was rage, a pure, crystalline rage that burned away all the sadness and left behind a terrifying clarity. The man I had loved didn't exist. He was a character, a role Raymond played to get what he wanted, and I had been his biggest, most profitable mark. The next day, Marcus Thorne, the PI, called. His voice was grim. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." It was worse than I could have ever imagined. Raymond didn't have any international business deals. His emerging markets were high-stakes poker tables in the back rooms of seedy bars. His venture capitalism was a string of online gambling websites based in Costa Rica. He had funneled every last cent I'd given him, and then some, into a crippling, pathological gambling addiction. And then came the final nail in Raymond's expensive coffin. The investigator said, "Ma'am, there's more. He has outstanding debts, significant ones. Not to banks, but to less formal lenders." "How significant?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "From what I can track from his accounts and the people I've spoken to, it's in the neighborhood of $2 million. $2 million? Debt. Under Georgia law, as his legal spouse, I was on the hook for every last penny they could come after my house, my savings, my portfolio, my company stock, everything I had worked my entire life to build. He was going to ruin me from beyond the grave. Oh, hell no. The rage didn't make me scream. It didn't make me cry. It made me focused. I hung up the phone and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. Raymond thought he was a player. He had no idea what it was like to go up against a real shark. He had played his last hand, but, honey, I was about to play mine. My first call was to my lawyer, David Hale, the most ruthless, brilliant, and expensive divorce and asset attorney in the state of Georgia. "David," I said, my voice all business, "I have a situation, and I need you to be creative." I laid it all out for him on his massive mahogany desk the next morning. The double life, the burner phone, the gambling, the side chick, and the $2 million debt. I had printouts, spreadsheets, a timeline. I was a CFO preparing for a hostile takeover. He listened patiently, his face in a perfect poker mask. "Brenda, this is bad," he said when I was done. "This spousal debt could wipe you out. These aren't the kind of people who just go away." I know," I said. "So here's what we're going to do. We need to divorce me from him. Now." David blinked. "Brenda, he's, deceased." "I don't care," I snapped, leaning forward. "Find a loophole, a legal fiction, a backdated filing, an emergency petition. I found out about the rampant fraud and the astronomical debt before he died, which I did. I made the decision to divorce him the moment I read those texts. The marriage itself was based on fraud. Annul it. Whatever it takes. I want every asset I ever earned locked down in an ironclad trust and completely shielded from this mess. My name needs to be legally and financially separate from the name Raymond Wallace, effective yesterday." David was a magician. A shark of my own, he found a little-known precedent. We filed an emergency petition for divorce and annulment based on gross marital fraud, citing the mountain of evidence I had just uncovered. We argued that I had been fraudulently induced into the marriage and into funding his entire life under false pretenses because the debt was so extreme and the fraud so clear. A sympathetic judge fast-tracked it. The divorce was officially finalized and stamped on Thursday afternoon. Raymond had been pronounced dead on Tuesday, but we had the paperwork. My assets, my home, my money, my entire empire was legally separated from the black hole of his debt. I was no longer the grieving widow. I was the liberated ex-wife. Phase 1 was complete. Now for Phase 2, the revenge. I knew from the text messages that this Candy person was greedy, stupid, and desperate. She truly believed she was about to inherit a fortune. She was waiting in the wings to swoop in and claim her prize. So I decided to give her the grandest stage imaginable to do it. I planned the most lavish, over-the-top funeral Atlanta had ever seen. The best flowers from the most expensive florist, the most expensive casket. I rented out the biggest church. I put a glowing obituary in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, not mentioning his business, just his larger-than-life personality and charismatic spirit. I invited all who knew and loved Raymond to attend. I knew she'd see it. I knew her ego and her greed wouldn't let her resist making a scene. Then I made 2 more calls. The first was back to David. David, I said, I need you at the funeral on Saturday. Sit in the front pew. And bring your briefcase. The second call was to the law firm representing Raymond's creditors, the loan sharks. I got the head attorney on the phone. I understand my late husband, Raymond Wallace, owed your clients a significant amount of money, I said, my voice dripping with sweet Southern charm. The man on the other end was cold as ice. That's right, $2,154,000 plus interest, and we intend to collect from his estate, Mrs. Wallace. I'm sure you do, I said sweetly. I just wanted to let you know that I will not be paying it. However, the person who is legally responsible for that debt will be making a very public declaration of her status at my husband's funeral on Saturday at Ebenezer Baptist Church, 11 a.m. sharp. I suggest you have your process servers ready to go. There was a long pause on the line. Who is this person? You'll know her when you see her, I said, and hung up the phone with a satisfying click. So there we were. Back in the church with this screaming, red-clad banshee, making a fool of herself and desecrating the house of the Lord. That's my husband! Candy shrieked again, stomping down the center aisle in her ridiculously high lucite heels, which were clearly not designed for walking, let alone stomping on holy ground. The congregation was in an uproar. My mother looked like she was about to faint. Raymond's family, who had always been a little suspicious of my success and their son's lack of it, looked utterly confused, their faces a mixture of horror and vindication. She stormed right up to the front, getting so close to me I could see the glitter in her eyeshadow. I stood my ground. I could smell that cheap cotton candy perfume again, the scent of my husband's betrayal. Who the hell are you? She sneered, looking my elegant suit up and down with contempt. Oh, I know. You must be that old bitch he was telling me about, the old cash cow he was stuck with for her money. Well, guess what, Grandma? He married me. We got married in Jamaica last month. She fumbled in her tiny rhinestone-encrusted purse and pulled out a piece of paper, waving it in my face like a weapon. It was a novelty marriage certificate, the kind you buy for $10 from a vendor on the beach. It had palm trees on it. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. But she, bless her greedy little heart, thought it was an ironclad legal document, her golden ticket. See, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It says right here, Candace Wallace, that's me. I'm the real Mrs. Wallace. So I'll be taking the keys to my house and my Bentley, and I want to see the life insurance policy right now. I know it's big. Ray told me everything. She was practically vibrating with a toxic mix of glee and aggression. She was putting on the performance of her life, convinced she was seconds away from becoming a millionaire widow. The whispers in the church grew to a roar. People were looking at me with pity. Poor Brenda, humiliated at her own husband's funeral. I let her finish. I let her scream and point and make her demands. I let her dig her own grave, shovelful by shovelful, in front of God and 200 witnesses. When she finally paused to take a ragged breath, I looked at her. Not with anger, not with sadness. I looked at her with a calm, cool pity that seemed to infuriate her more than any screaming match could have. Are you finished? I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying through the now silent church. Her face soured. Don't you talk down to me. I am the wife. I get everything. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then I turned to the congregation. I sincerely apologize for this interruption, I said, my voice as steady and clear as a bell. It seems there are some profound misunderstandings regarding my late ex-husband's estate. I put a slight, deliberate emphasis on the ex-husband. I saw a flicker of confusion on Candy's face, but the greed was too strong for the warning to register. Before we proceed, I continued, I'd like to invite my attorney, David Hale, to say a few words to clarify the financial situation for everyone. I stepped aside, a gracious host at my own revenge party. David, looking sharp and serious in his dark Brioni suit, stepped up to the lectern. He placed his leather briefcase on the floor, opened it, and took out a single thick folder. Good morning. he said, his baritone voice commanding the room into absolute silence. "I am David Hale, counsel for Miss Brenda Thompson." He used my maiden name, my real name. It was the first time I'd heard it in a public professional capacity in 15 years. It sounded like freedom. "While this is a highly unorthodox setting for such announcements," David said, his eyes scanning the crowd, "our hand has been forced by these passionate declarations. I am here to provide a brief and final statement on the estate of the deceased Mr. Raymond Wallace." Candy crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. She thought he was about to read the will and announce her as the sole beneficiary. "Oh, honey." "First," David said, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion, "let's address the matter of the life insurance. The $5 million policy, which Mr. Wallace often spoke of, lapsed 7 months ago due to non-payment of the premiums. There is no life insurance. There is no payout." The smirk on Candy's face faltered, twitching at the corner. "What? No, that's a lie. He told me." David ignored her as if she were a fly and continued, his voice getting colder. "Second, regarding the assets. The home in Buckhead, the Mercedes S-Class in the parking lot, and all other properties, stocks, and investment portfolios are and have always been the sole and separate property of my client, Ms. Brenda Thompson. They were acquired by her prior to the marriage or with her own premarital funds and are legally shielded within the Thompson Family Trust." He paused, letting that sink in. "The Bentley," he added, looking directly at Candy for the first time, "was leased. The vehicle has already been repossessed by the dealership due to, again, several months of non-payment. It was towed from the parking lot of an LA Fitness indicator early this morning." Candy's face went from confused to pale. The vibrant red of her dress made her look sickly. No, he was a millionaire. He had international deals. He was an investor." "Which brings me to my final point," David said, his voice dropping like a guillotine. "Mr. Wallace was not a millionaire. In fact, at the time of his death, Mr. Raymond Wallace was in significant personal debt. After a full and thorough accounting, we have determined his total liabilities to be $2,154,782.16. A collective gasp, a real one this time, echoed through the church. Candy looked like she had been physically slapped. "This debt," David continued, his voice relentless, "is owed to a consortium of private creditors. As Mr. Wallace has no assets to his name, the debt legally passes to his estate, to be satisfied by his next of kin, specifically his legal spouse at the time of death." And then David turned his gaze from the congregation and looked directly at Candy, pinning her in place. His voice was laced with surgical steel. "Ms. Candace Miller, you have, in front of numerous witnesses and on church property, publicly and forcefully declared yourself to be the legal wife of the deceased. You have presented what you claim to be a valid marriage certificate as proof of this union." He gestured to me. "My client, Ms. Brenda Thompson, on the other hand, is not the widow. Her divorce from Mr. Wallace on the grounds of gross financial and marital fraud was finalized 2 days ago by an emergency decree from the Fulton County Superior Court. She is legally and financially a free and unencumbered woman." It was in that moment that Candy finally understood. The fog agreed lifted, revealing the terrifying abyss beneath. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from David to me to the mahogany casket and back again. The color drained completely from her face. "And since you have so passionately and so publicly claimed the title of Mrs. Wallace," David finished, his voice now a low, dangerous purr, "you also get to claim the responsibilities and the debts that come with it." On cue, as if directed by a stage manager, 2 large men in dark, ill-fitting suits, who had been standing quietly and patiently at the back of the church, began to walk down the aisle. They weren't mourners. They were process servers, and they meant business. They stopped right in front of Candy, One of them held out a thick, heavy stack of documents, the kind that ruins lives. "Candace Miller?" one of them said gruffly, his voice flat. She couldn't speak. She just stared at the papers, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "You've been served?" He thrust the packet of legal doom into her hands. She was too shocked to even resist. She just held it, her eyes glazed over, staring down at the cover page. I could see the big, bold letters from where I stood. Civil suit for collection of debt. And then she broke. It started as a whimper, a small, pathetic sound. Then it grew into a full-blown, hysterical, guttural scream. "No! No! This can't be happening. He promised me. He said I'd be rich. It's not fair." She dropped the legal papers, which scattered across the marble floor around her cheap heels like confetti at a nightmare parade. She started clawing at her brassy weave, sobbing uncontrollably, her expertly applied makeup running in black and pink rivers down her face. The whole church just stared, mesmerized by the spectacular karmic implosion of a gold digger's dream. I didn't watch for long. While all eyes were on the screaming girl in the red dress, I turned. I walked past the casket of the man who had tried to ruin me, the architect of this whole mess. I didn't even glance at it. He was no longer my problem. I walked down the center aisle, my head held high, the steady, rhythmic click-clack of my Louboutin heels, the only sound accompanying Candy's pathetic sobs. The whispers followed me, but they were different now. They weren't whispers of pity. They were whispers of awe, of shock, of respect. I pushed open the heavy church doors and stepped out into the bright, warm Georgia sun. It felt like walking out of a prison. I took a deep breath of fresh, clean air, free from the scent of lilies and lies, and my Mercedes was waiting right out front, gleaming in the sun. I got in, the smell of rich, clean leather enveloping me like a hug. I didn't look back at the church. I put on my sunglasses, turned on the ignition, and the car purred to life. I queued up my Freedom playlist, and the opening chords of Beyonce's Sorry filled the cabin. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced for a second in my rearview mirror. I could see the doors of the church, a dark rectangle of my past. I pressed my foot on the gas, leaving it all behind me. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. Honey, I disagree. I think it's a dish best served publicly with ironclad legal documentation at your trifling ex-husband's funeral. The devil works hard, and my ex-husband's creditors work even harder. But a scorned woman with a CFO title and a killer lawyer? Child, we don't just work harder. We rewrite the whole damn story. And in my new story, I drive off into the sunset, debt-free, single, and finally, gloriously at peace. And as for Candy, well, bless her heart. I hope she looks good in orange because she just inherited a $2 million problem. And I just inherited my life back.